Welcome to this lecture. My name is Fred Mjomba. Today we are talking about chapter 7 of object-oriented programming. We are talking about constructors and destructors. So the definition of constructors is that these are special class functions. That means they are functions in a class, but they carry out a special function. And their function is basically to perform initialization of every object when it is created. You see, when you have a class, it's a template, and you're going to have objects. Objects can be so many of different sizes and types. So what happens is that you have to initialize objects because they are variables. A variable, if you don't initialize it, it can have a garbage figure or a garbage value. So constructors are there to help initialize objects. You'll ask yourself, how do you initialize objects? Yeah, use constructor to initialize, because an object contains several data types. It can have integer, it can have string, it can have whatever. So those different data types must be initialized. So we use a constructor to initialize. So the compiler calls the constructor whenever an object is created. Okay? So every time you create an object, there is a function that is called to initialize that object to some value, or to, when we are talking about initializing here, in this case, we simply saying assign some memory of a particular size. The memory can be empty. That's why some objects can have a null. You can initialize them to a null value or to a void. Okay, so an example will be, if I have a class called A, and the class has a data member of integer type X, then it will have a constructor also called A, and the constructor is going to be of public type or of public access type. Okay, so a constructor inherits the same name of the class. And then this constructor doesn't have parameters, so we call it a default class constructor. So when you're defining a constructor, you must remember the name of the constructor will be the same name of the class. But a constructor is a function that doesn't have a return type, so don't put any return there. It doesn't have a return type. Okay? So constructors again can be defined either inside the class definition or outside. So you can construct something outside the class. You simply use a resolution operator if you're using a constructor outside the class definition. Okay, so an example is given there of the same class A having a data member of integer type called I. Then we have a public constructor there called A, which has no parameters. Now that one is within the class. If it is outside, after the semicolon there, we can have a constructor also having the same name of a class. So you have the class name and the resolution operator, then the constructor. So what are the different types of constructors that we have? So constructors are of three types. We have the default constructor, we have parameterized constructor, and we have copy constructor. Now a default constructor is like what we have seen there. It doesn't take any argument, or it doesn't have any parameters. That is a default class constructor. Yeah? If we have a class called cube and then it has a data member called side and a public function called cube. So the public function cube, which has the same name as the class and it has no parameters, it is a constructor, but it is a default constructor, which is going to initialize the side maybe to some value you're going to specify. Now, a parameterized constructor is a constructor or a function, special function that has parameters. We understand functions of parameters within the parentheses. So if I'm using this constructor, I can provide different values to different data members of the object. Assuming I have my same object, my class cube. So my class cube has integer as a side of integer type. So, and then it has a constructor called cube, which receives the parameter x. So the parameter x is going to assign value to the side. So automatically this parameter in that constructor has made my constructor to be parameterized. That means I'm having different parameters in that function. So I can initialize my different class variables using the parameterized constructor. Another type of constructor is the copy constructor. Copy constructor is a special type of constructor which takes on an object as an argument. So, we can supply objects to arguments. Instead of literal values, we can supply objects. So if we supply them, then we call that function a copy constructor.